I am very pleased to introduce our guest speakers this morning. We have Joan McCusker, who is the CFO of Amherst Wilder Foundation in St. Paul, and Kristine Martin, who's a former VP of the Wilder Center for Communities and the incoming president for Eastside Neighborhood Services in Minneapolis. These ladies have a great deal of experience in serving their communities by addressing the economic and opportunity disparities in the region, and we look forward to learning more about their work here in the Twin Cities. Thank you.
We haven't rehearsed this part, so.
You want to kick us off? Are our mics on? Mine sounds good. There you go.
Can you hear me?
It's good? There we are. There we are. Well, good morning. How is everyone this morning? It sounds like you were at, was it Target Field last night? Or US Bank Stadium? Stadium, yes. Yeah, I've had the opportunity to be in there once as well. Well, I'm Kristine Martin, and as Jamie just introduced me to you all, I have recently left the Wilder Foundation and have taken a position as the president of another community organization on this side of the river in Minneapolis, Eastside Neighborhood Services. But I did spend 6 years over at Wilder, so our relationship and our conversation with you this morning is based on my work over there. So let me introduce myself to you in a way that I tend to do when I'm in the space having conversations about race and inclusion, diversity, cultural competency, and subjects that really require us to be honest with each other if we're going to make any progress in. So what I would tell you is that I am a baby boomer. I am of European American descent, although I didn't spend the first part of my life in this country, I actually did overseas. I am a marathoner and a triathlete, more recently a triathlete, and I'm heterosexual. Joan.
Wow, we really didn't rehearse this. Anyway, I'm Joan McCusker. I am the CFO at Wilder Foundation, as was introduced. And you're probably thinking to yourself, what in the world is this going to be like a numbers thing? Is there a lot of financial stuff that goes along with this? And there is. However, that's not my capacity here. So we are losing Kristine, unfortunately. She has big shoes to fill, and I won't be able to do that. But I get the pleasure of working with our business leaders on the Itasca Project and helping to move this really important work forward. So, my background, I grew up as a farm girl in North Dakota. In fact, I have a niece who would love to be here. She is a Lexington lover because she loves horses so much. So she's going to be really jealous. She has her horses out on the farm in North Dakota. So I often say, diversity for me was, are you Catholic or are you Lutheran? And the two shall not mix. As I was growing up. We're getting better. I married a Catholic and thought I was going to kill my father in the process, but it's worked out for almost 30 years, and my father is still with us and welcomes my husband in his home, so that's a good thing. So diversity happens in all sorts of ways. I think as we get started, I'm going to do something really dangerous because I have been on these exchange trips, and you guys have been here, what, 2.5 days or something? So try to stick with me and try to humor me. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and I hope you will wake up when we are done with this. Okay, so please close your eyes and imagine you are on a train. I want you to think about what you're hearing. You're hearing clank, 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 clank of the train as it goes. But I also want you to know that you are hearing a language you know nothing about. Everybody is saying all this stuff and you know nothing. I don't get any of it. Now, you're pretty sure they're talking about you. You noticed that when you got on the train, if they saw you looking at them, They smiled politely, and then when you weren't looking, they giggled behind your back. Yep, they're talking about me. Then, I want you to think about what the smells are. So there's the oil and grease smell that goes along with a train. But oh my gosh, what is that horrible smell? I've smelt nothing like it. And then it dawns on you. The person next to you brought food of their ethnic variety on the train. It's not the same type of food that you would normally have or smell. What is it? Now I want you to think about what you might be seeing. Oh no, walking down the middle of the aisle, it's a person in a uniform. Oh my gosh, it's a police officer. Are my papers in order? I know I have my passport, but did I do my ticket properly? I mean, that machine was so confusing before I got on. Am I on the right train? I don't know what all these words mean on this piece of paper I have. What if he throws me out right here? What am I going to do? I can't speak the language. I don't know anybody. Your heart races really, really fast. This might happen to you. So this was my experience when I was in Europe. This was something that was a vacation. The train ride lasted about 2 hours, I think. It was really exhilarating for me. I was experiencing a new culture, right? I had means, I had privilege, I had money. If that conductor said, no, you're not on the right train and kicked me out, I had some money I could pull out of my pocket and give to him or give to the right person. If things got really hairy, I had the US government behind me. Surely they would come and save me. Well, we hope. But I want you to think throughout our presentation about those in your community who this might be a daily occurrence for. I'm sure Lexington is somewhat like the Twin Cities areas. We have people from all sorts of cultures, people who don't speak the language. We need these people in our workplace, but how do we treat them? They never feel comfortable and at home. The food is always weird to them. The language is always foreign to them. So a lot of what you're going to hear this morning was based on that and what we need in our workforce, and how do we make people feel more comfortable and welcomed and engaged, even though they might be different than us. So please keep that in mind, and if you haven't reopened your eyes, I hope that you will and stick with us and not be sleeping. If you start snoring, I'm going to come and get you. So let me take you through what we're going to talk about this morning. I don't know if we have a clicker. Okay, good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who Wilder is. We can't come to one of these without giving you a little bit of a commercial, but hopefully you won't get too bored with that either. Then I'm going to talk about the Twin Cities demographics just very briefly so that you get a snapshot and a setup of how that impacts the work that we're doing. You've probably heard a lot of that this week already, so we'll keep that quick. Then Kristine is going to talk about how did we get here, and probably most important for you, the leadership cohort, what that is and how it works. And then how do we know if it is working? And what have we heard from that cohort that might be impactful for you or might help you understand why it is we're doing this work? Sound good? Okay, good, because that's what you're going to hear. So back in the early 1900s, it was somewhat of a tragic story. The Wilders, the whole family, there were 3 of them. Amherst was the father, Franny was the mother, and Cornelia was the daughter. All died within about 10 years of each other. In doing so, they left $2.6 million in the early 1900s, a lot of money, to help the needy and poor in St. Paul. Now, they were very forward-thinking. When you look at the cutout box there of the language, That was language that was in their wills and makes the basis of our mission and has been in place for basically 111 years. So we're very proud of that. But what the Wilder Foundation does, and don't get tricked by the foundation name, we are not a grant-making organization. We are an operating foundation, so we provide services. But we are where knowledge, compassion, and action come together to help the people of St. Paul and greater. So we do this through 3 business units. We have a direct service unit that does things like children's mental health to aging services. It operates a daycare center and provides child development, and it promotes and provides food in food desert areas through a renovated city bus, a grocery store on wheels, if you will. Our second division is a renowned research division. It does applied social research that helps move our issues forward and helps communities better understand their issues and how we can make progress. And then the unit that Kristine led, Center for Communities, and she probably will correct me as I say this, but they work hard to engage the citizens and leaders in the community to work on the most important and most complex areas of the community, issues of the community, through things like leadership programs, policy, advocacy, and community building activities. So those are the 3 basic units of Wilder. And really it is the Center for Communities, and then research lending its data collection that are working with our Itasca group. So if we think about some of the statistics, and I'm not going to bore you with this, I hope. I'm not going to take long enough to do that, but don't feel you have to make a bunch of notes. This handout that you received has all of this statistical information in it. I just want to set the stage. So, of all the residents in the Twin Cities, 3 in 10 are people of color. Doesn't sound huge, right? But in some of our neighborhoods, sizable neighborhoods, we have 8 or 9 of 10 of color. And I don't think that's unusual in metropolitan areas either. When we look, though, against the national numbers, we are not quite as diverse as the nation as a whole. However, our growth trajectory is significantly faster than what we're seeing nationwide. So as we move forward, we are going to become more and more diverse. If we look at the type of diversity that we have, there's also significant differences in how that is growing. So if you look at the Asian and Black populations in the Twin Cities, they have tripled over the last 15 years. Huge growth. And then if you look at the Hispanic population, it's grown by 4. So we're seeing fast acceleration in the growth of our people of color within the Twin Cities. Now, all of this was important to the business leaders, but what really hit home was when we started talking about jobs and who was going to be working in their businesses. So if we think about what the work population is going to look like in the Twin Cities, and each of these little suitcases or briefcases represents 100,000 jobs, come 2024, we're going to need just under 2 million people working in the Twin Cities. The current working population projected into 2024 between 18 and 64 leaves us about 500,000 people short. Now, if you consider 16 to 18 and then over 64, some of us are working longer, right? You probably get another 200,000 or 300,000 workers, so 2 or 3 more of those briefcases are going to be filled. But we are likely going to have a shortage by 2024. And if you place on top of that, if we're not fully utilizing the people that we currently have in the community, we will be even shorter. So let's look at how we are using or how people, So let's look at the number of working age adults that will be people of color as we move in there. And by the time we get to 2040, we're going to have 42% of the population being adults of color. But if we think about how we're currently using people of color within our businesses. This is, I think, the most shocking of the data to me. So there is a survey of 25 of the largest cities, and when we look at employment gaps between whites and the various ethnic communities, the Twin Cities ranks at the lowest on almost all of them, which is very sad. So when we think of whites against American Indians are at the 25th place. When we look at whites versus Asians, again, we rank at the 25th place out of 25. Certainly not presenting these because these are proud Twin City data points, but it helps set up what it is that we are doing. Oh, wow. We are much better, aren't we, when we look at whites versus blacks. We jumped all the way up to 22. Still very sad. And then when we think about, or look at the Hispanics, we're also at number 22. If we continue to underutilize our working population in the Twin Cities, there is no way we are going to be able to do the work that we need to do. So there were a number of reasons the Itasca leaders were very interested in this problem, but hitting most directly to their home, their businesses, if you will, was the impact that they will be seeing on their work population. So I'm going to one more, sorry. So if we do just some summary points, I didn't take you through a lot of age information because I'm certain that is pretty consistent. We are all getting older and aging out of the workforce, so that helps create and set up part of this problem. The Twin Cities certainly and the nation is getting more racially diverse, so we have to understand how to engage and how to help people feel comfortable and needed and wanted in our work communities. And then I just showed those large gaps by race. So hopefully that gives you a little background as to why in the world Itasca started to think about this and the issues that we are facing, which perhaps are somewhat similar to what you see in Lexington. So, Kristine.
So let us revisit very briefly why the Wilder Foundation, as Joan has been explaining what we do, why would the Wilder Foundation be connected to this thing called the Itasca Project, which I'm going to give you an overview in a few minutes here. So you have the foundation, which is focused on social services, research, and developing leaders, and then you have this huge regional effort led by the leadership of those 17 Fortune 500 companies and all of the other major corporations in the Twin Cities partnering with this organization over in St. Paul. And we selected a few visuals for you to see that would ground you in the capacity of the Wilder Foundation to be of service in more ways than a traditional social service organization. So the Wilder Foundation is the largest provider of social services to the Southeast Asian population in the country. So if you remember, the Hmong, the Vietnamese all came over after the Southeast Asian wars. Many, if not most of the Hmong population resettled here in the Twin Cities. Subsequently, we're the largest provider. The document that Joan referenced, that's sitting in your packet, the 4-pager, on all of the data on workforce and demographics, et cetera, is put out by Wilder Research. Wilder Research also hosts it's a one-of-a-kind indicators website that represents data from all over the state: social, economic, well-being, health, education, and housing. And it actually was originally modeled after the Boston Indicators Project, but has taken a more senior role in being more robust in providing actually data that drills down to the neighborhood level, real data down to the neighborhood level. The bus on the bottom is Wilder's commitment to innovation and responsivity. That's a Twin Cities mobile market. We actually have 2 of those buses and another one on order where we have, it's a grocery store with fresh fruit, foods, etc., that goes into low-income neighborhoods that are food deserts. We prepare community leaders. The last two shots on the right are our work to prepare leaders to be public policy advocates at the Capitol. Yesterday, they were community organizers. Today, they're moving public policy at the Capitol, as well as our 3 leadership programs, which are about assisting community residents to become leaders in their own organizations or in their own communities.
The big green one.
The big green one. Nope, sorry, I pressed the little green one. Okay, so moving along. Has anybody seen this slide before?
This is a great slide. I love this slide.
How did we get here? Anybody want to raise their hand and guess what it means to you, or explain what it means to you? I know Minnesotans don't raise their hands, but what about Kentuckians? Yes, go ahead, sir.
Life is all about perspective.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. For not seeing the slide before, it's a very good interpretation. Life is all about perspective. And I share this with you because what we're going to be talking about and what is the real work of the Itasca CEOs in this cohort around diversity and inclusion is about understanding that all of us in the room, whatever race, whatever age, that's why I told you a little bit about myself, whatever we define as culture, also then colors or creates our perspective on the world. And based on our perspective, we act. I'm sure that makes a lot of sense. So no matter what we see or where we are, unless we are able to suspend our perspective and shift to considering that there is another perspective or another interpretation of the world or interpretation of what's happening in front of us, we will only continue to paint what we see. Okay, what is this Itasca Project? The Itasca Project has been around for 13 years. It is a association of regional leaders from around the Twin Cities who came together to say, and actually they commissioned a report called Mind the Gap, and that report revealed that although the Twin Cities, and Joan has been referencing this, although the Twin Cities is super high and super accomplished and super in a super leading role around certain areas of quality of life, we also have some of the worst disparities per capita in the nation. Our education results, the gap between white children that graduate from high school and children of color who graduate from high school is actually the worst in the country. I think we battle Mississippi once in a while, but it truly is. It's a horrendous gap. Our employment gap between those of us who live in the state who are white and people of color is very, very close to the bottom, as Joan referenced. Home ownership, the number of people who own homes in this state who are white versus people of color, any color, as defined by the individual, is also horrific. All of this data is on the Wilder's Minnesota Compass website that I was referencing earlier. But as we walk and talk, and as we live and breathe this great air and live in an environment that is moderately safe, I just want to be really honest with you that we do have some of the worst disparities in the country. So the Itasca group got together, they commissioned this report, and they were shocked that we had so many glaring disparities. And so they said to each other, and I think there were about 22 company leaders in the beginning, we've got to do something about this. Not knowing what to do because most of the people in the room were white. And if you can imagine, you have 22 corporate leaders who are white, their perspective is probably more common than uncommon with each other. They set about trying to host forums trying to invite people to educate, trying to create opportunities for a different kind of conversation to happen. And 12 years later, most of the work of the Itasca Project, it's still going on. Most of the work is done through committee or task force or small group. This one I'm going to talk about specifically was done in a task force model. I believe yesterday you met Mike Langley and R.T. Rybeck. R.T., as the mayor of Minneapolis, was a former member of the Itasca group as the mayor, and now as a member as the president of the Minneapolis Foundation. Mike Langley runs Greater MSP. I just want to point out that the Itasca Project, Greater MSP, MSP WIN, there's a couple of other associations all trying to work together, both to take on the issues of disparity, the causes of disparity, and then through some of the smaller work groups begin to actually pilot activities and challenging initiatives that will begin to break down the barriers, the structural barriers or the cultural barriers that keep the disparities as they are. The one that I'm going to talk to you about today is the Socioeconomic Employment Gaps Task Force. And I'm not going to read the definition, but 3 years ago, 2013, two of the leaders of the large Itasca group were commissioned with trying to work on this employment disparity number. So one of those people was my former boss. The other is the president of the Thriving Companies, I believe is the actual title. They got together and said, well, why don't we host quarterly meetings? And in those quarterly meetings, we'll invite all the CEOs in the Twin Cities who want to come and learn from each other. So we'll have like a dog and pony show. We'll have somebody come and talk about the great things that they're doing. And then we'll have all the other CEOs clap for them, give them some good feedback, and maybe take away a learning or two. 2 meetings were held. And what do you think happened at the third? Anybody want to venture to guess? Who came to that meeting?
No one.
People came, actually. Was it the CEO? No. No, it wasn't the CEO. The CEOs were the ones invited to these meetings to learn from their fellow CEO about what was working in their organization. After the second meeting, the CEO must have said to themselves, I've got more important things to do. And they sent their HR person. Not a bad person to send, not the top decision maker, though, of an organization. Right? Who sets culture in an organization? The CEO, the president, the executive director. And if they weren't coming to the conversation, and it was the senior HR VP or the diversity and inclusion, pardon me?
Or the CFO.
Or the CFO. The diversity and inclusion manager. How many of you have those in your organization, right? The people who already know the work. The people who already know what needs to happen, or at least are charged with that. So the CEO stopped coming, and we were preparing for the third one, and my boss said to me, what should we do? And I said, well, let's go to the third meeting, let's see who shows up, and afterwards let's sit down and unpack what is it that we know, and what is it that would make these CEOs really uncomfortable. Because once again, it is their organization. They are producing the numbers, right? They are responsible for getting employees into the organization to do work, which creates a product, which hopefully creates a profit, or if you're an educator, a teacher into the school building to educate the children, who then become valuable contributing citizens. So we had the third meeting. Once again, the CEOs weren't there. We went into the back room after that, and we said, what do we need to do? So a bunch of smart people got into the room, some from Wilder, some from Itasca, some from Thrivent, some from McKinsey. And we said, at Wilder, we do things in a cohort model. We do things in an environment where people have to work together for the course of a period of time, and they have to get really uncomfortable, and they have to be transparent with each other, and they have to talk the talk and walk the walk through this experience. We also said and knew that CEOs like to be with other CEOs. So what happens when the Director of Diversity and Inclusion starts coming? CEO goes, right? CEOs like to be together. So what if we did a cohort of CEOs, and this is where it got fun, and the focus of the work is going to be about them and their perspective and their worldview and how they talk about racism or how they talk about difference or how they talk about other, right? In that room, create a safe space, create continuity in the conversation, have a facilitator and a coordinator. In this case, the coordinator, because of my interest in the work and my commitment to the work, was me. My facilitator is a person of color. So we role model, right, the opportunity for difference to work together. We create a safe space. We make the cohort last a year. You have to be a CEO if you're going to be in there, right? You don't get to send anybody else in your place. And we're going to push you around diversity and inclusion by starting with the intercultural competency assessment, which is an assessment tool that we use here in the Twin Cities. I don't know if any of the educators in the room have used it. But basically, it's an assessment that reveals one's ability to see difference and adapt to difference, right? Some people, truth be told, choose not to even see difference. They see the world only from their perspective, kind of like the rhino did. If I only see the world this way, I'll be safe, right? And some people see difference, are curious about difference, and adapt to difference. So we use the assessment tool, and then we started pushing. In the model, we said we're going to start pushing at when you see and are in conversations about race, about inclusion, and about diversity, how are you going to check yourself so that you're moving out of the place of comfort to a place of discomfort? And all this is going to happen in a year. That was our goal. It was all going to happen in a year. So we broke the model up to lean, which is about, the first one says learn. The first one is about learning about yourself. The second one is about leading. So if you become a more knowledgeable, informed, aware, and committed CEO to looking at these diversity and disparity numbers, then you're going to be a better leader. And you're going to lead your organization, and you're going to demand things be different. And the third part of it is collectively, as a group of informed CEOs who are doing things differently, will they lead the region differently? So we talked about it from a learn, lead, lead in. Or you could say it's about the individual organization in the region. So, how did we go about picking these lucky participants, right? So we knew we had a group of 65 that were members of the Itasca group, but we also said you don't have to be limited to being a member of the Itasca group, because there's a lot of nonprofit leaders who look like me who wanted to be in the cohort. So we weren't limiting it just to the Itasca group. And we set about the first year as a pilot and thought, well, we're going to learn, we're going to be engaged, we're going to get feedback, we're going to be uncomfortable, we're going to stumble, but we're going to do it together. So we advertised it as a group of, we were looking for 15, we got 11. And we met for a year. We met 6 times, actually we met 5 times during that first year. And we did all the things that I told you about, right? We made it safe, we made it tough, they were tough on each other. When we didn't know what exactly, when we didn't have answers, the CEOs decided to work together outside of the meetings to develop answers for themselves. So they developed book clubs, they developed reading material, they shared videos with each other. If someone would come across a video on unconscious bias, they'd shoot it to the group email, and the other CEOs would participate in this. We ultimately began to bring in real-life issues during the second year. So we're in our third year right now, but during the second year, we had a really tough year. I don't know about you all in Kentucky, but November of last year was a really tough year on most of the people in Minnesota. I won't get too political, but we elected a president, and it impacted our region greatly. We just happened to have a cohort meeting a week after the election, and the amazingly raw conversation that these CEOs had with each other about what were they going to do as leaders to lead with confidence and with the ability to honor that people were coming to work in a different way than they were the day before the election. I don't know if that was the way it turned out in your state, but it was a pretty tough month in this state. So these presidents, these CEOs talk to each other. Like, what can I do? Could I, set up a room to have people want to go in and have conversation about what happened or how life is changing? How do I want to speak about this? And so they did a lot of sharing with each other. We also had a really bad murder here in the Twin Cities. It's in the front of the newspaper the last couple of days, I've noticed. Philando Castile, African-American man, upstanding, worked at the public schools, was shot in the car. His girlfriend videotaped it. That brought up just an incredible force of responses in our community. And the group had a chance to talk to each other about that, right? Because when do you have a chance to talk to other people who are your peers about something you read in the newspaper where you don't necessarily have an opportunity to hear another person's perspective? You read about a murder, you talk to your wife or you talk to your husband, and then you go on your way. This was an opportunity for the group to be able to talk with each other. So our groups right now, we take 15 people a year. They all have to be the senior person in the organization. We have university, government, corporation, nonprofit, higher education. So really the 5 areas. Every group has hopefully an equal distribution of men and women, white people, people of color, and organization distribution. We try to make it as diverse as possible for many reasons. We have actually 6 sessions a year. I already talked about everyone having this assessment at the very beginning. They have a private conversation with a person who's qualified in the tool to talk about what their results look like on this intercultural development inventory, to learn a little bit more about how they as individuals see the world. And after the second year, I did a count of the number of employees, the number of FTE positions that were being represented by these CEOs, and it was 130,000. 130,000. The current year, we actually haven't done the tally, but Joan will have to, since I'm gone, Joan will have to tally up how many employees are represented. And the reason the number is important goes to the slide I'm going to be talking about in a second here. And that is that in order to participate, it doesn't cost you anything to be a part of the group. But it does cost you to participate in being accountable. And what I mean by accountability is every organization has to submit their workforce data. You don't get to hide your workforce data and participate in this group, right? And your workforce data is whether or not you walk the walk, right? How at the beginning of your experience, what is your workforce data? And at the end of your experience, or even several years down the road, does your workforce begin to change? Do the dimensions of your workforce begin to change? And I'll show you a slide of what I mean by the dimensions of your workforce. We ask that you sign a contract to submit your data, and actually it's really simple. The website was already created, so all you have to do is your HR person has to go in and enter the data, right? And it's the same data you present to EEO if you have to give your data to them. But basically we're looking at, do you walk the walk, right? I kind of got ahead of myself when I got into that one, but I'm not going to go through all of this with you. You have this in your packet, but this between year 2 and year 3, because we are, Wilder is a research organization as well. We have lots of research analysts running around. They said, we'll sit down with you and we'll talk about what is the logic of what you're trying to do. What is the logic of what you're trying to do? So I got to flip forward here to look at the look at the logic model myself. Most important thing for me, the most important thing to recognize here is if you look at any logic model, what are the inputs? We went through those already, right? Just showing up and doing the IDI, et cetera. And what's the long-term goal? The long-term goal for the Itasca CEO cohort work is to increase in workforce diversity at all levels of the organization. An increase in workforce diversity at all levels of the organization. This just doesn't mean, if you represent a bank, that all your tellers are diverse. No. Your supervisors, your managers, your vice presidents, there should be a pathway for ascension for anyone in the organization who's interested in becoming more than a bank teller, right? So that we were very clear that this is about diversity at any level in your organization. I also draw your attention to the short-term outcomes. And I wish I had time to go through all of those with you, but please take a minute and look at that. I can't stress for you enough what's happening for the individual CEOs during this year. I can't stress enough the courage that it takes to tell your story, the discomfort you might feel when you ask for the first time, what's unconscious bias? I don't get it. Or, I thought I was getting better results than I am. What is going on? So this notion of being uncomfortable and moving to a place of comfort is happening. The ability to recognize the difference between diversity, inclusion, and intercultural competence. I can't tell you how many people I speak to who say diversity and inclusion and have no idea what all that means. Right? Oh, we hire, we go to universities, or we go to places where there's employment fairs, employment banks, etc. But we don't seem to get anybody. Well, the organization is 99.9% white, and if you're a person of color who speaks Spanish, like Joan was talking about, why the hell would you want to go to an organization that's all white? Right? Nobody looks like you. So this is the kind of conversation we have in the group. So please take a minute to look at that logic model. We at Wilder hold ourselves accountable to this. If we're not doing this, we're not doing something right. So let me speak a little bit about that, the data that I had referenced. So,
Probably have to wrap up pretty soon too.
Yep. So the data, every year, the CEOs, their HR person enters in the data. We're hoping that after 10 years, we're going to be able to see some change. Let me tell you right now, we still don't see change. Our dashboard, we're just finishing up the second year. And these are the data points that are included in the dashboard. Employees, so you submit the distribution of your employees, the distribution by race, and gender. The employees, supervisors and managers, promotions, new hires, voluntary exits, and involuntary exits. So we're looking at the pipeline in, the pipeline out, the pipeline up, and what's the whole picture look like. Okay? Every organization gets their individual dashboard, and then there's an aggregate dashboard at the end of the year. So take a look at this. This was the first cohort. Most important to know that this is not unusual for our area, right? We still have more white people that live in Minnesota than non-white people. So generally, organizations are going to have more white people working in them. What I want to draw your attention to is the difference between the number of white people who are managers and supervisors versus people of color, and the number of promotions for white people versus people of color. This is 11 organizations. We have 15 more, and 2 of the additional 15 are major corporations. They're in that top Fortune 1700 or 17 Fortune 500 organizations. It is what it is. Right? Lots of people of diverse backgrounds are coming into organizations, and turnover is always turnover, right? This is not the job I wanted. I don't like the hours, etc. But it's the promotions and the number of opportunities to see yourself as leading, right? That we want to take on. If people don't feel a sense of responsibility and ownership in the organization, we all know they move on, right? To find an environment where they can. So. Not necessarily great news, but most importantly, it's news. 50,000 FTEs represented there. Joan tells me we're running real short on time here, so I will not read any of these. What I want to say to you is we have been asking people to give us feedback. We do an annual survey for CEOs to give us feedback about this experience. The top person is the CEO of a line of health, Penny Wheeler, who went through last year. Who's the second one?
Charlie Zell.
Charlie Zelli. He's the commissioner of MnDOT, the Department of Transportation, who went through the first year. And Brad Hewitt, I mentioned earlier, is the CEO of Thrivent. This is what they say about the experience. I will tell you that although all 3 of these people are white, the groups have diversity in them, not at the level that I ultimately would like, but this represents, quite frankly, the distribution of leaders of color or lack thereof in the Twin Cities. And finally.
So Anderson Windows is one of our success stories, I would call it, not because we've necessarily seen a lot of data change with Anderson, but Anderson Windows is a premier window manufacturer in North America. Hopefully you've heard of them. They are located just outside of the Twin Cities. They have about 11,000 employees nationwide. And their leader, Jay Lund, came a bit skeptical, I would say, and a little bit hesitant around, I'm not going to air my dirty laundry, or does my dirty laundry look the same as everybody else's dirty laundry, so to speak. But he was enlightened. I mean, once he started working in the program and understanding himself, sharing with the other CEOs, he said, yes, I need this all the way through my organization. I need my factory floor to be better represented and to understand people of all types there. I need my leaders, my direct supervisors. I need my directors and my executives. I need everybody. We all have to understand and work toward this if I'm going to continue to have a successful business. So, Kristine, maybe you can share a little bit about what they've been doing at Anderson.
Yeah, real briefly. Wilder was hired to work with all those different subgroups that Joan was talking about. So we have a diversity team that can go in and do sort of work with the organization, like what are their needs, where are they at, what's their profile on the IDI, and then make recommendations for how to convene the various decision-making bodies and to norm the language around the IDI framework. So we've done all that work for them. Now they're in the stage of experimentation. They're developing ERGs, they're developing a diversity council, they're beginning to challenge themselves and do some cross-hierarchy group interaction, and they're looking for some feedback internally about how that works. The next phase that they will be working on is having us come in and help them look at their policy, their budget, their hiring practices, and I refer to that third part as sort of concretizing, getting it into the DNA, and creating a sustainable environment that is sustainably diverse, sustainably inclusive, right, and sustainably successful for all people who want to be successful in that organization.
The other really interesting part, so we talked earlier about we didn't just want the head of HR to be involved. Now we're at the point where their head of HR called and said, look, I understand diversity and inclusion better than Jay, but Jay's way ahead of me. I got to find a cohort of HR leaders where we can have those same type of discussions, and how do we support our organizations and our CEOs. So we're actually working with her to develop a cohort of HR leaders that can go through a somewhat similar process.
I don't know, do we have anything else?
I think we're done.
Yeah, so.